Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shark Tank. My name is Yaakov Wolf. Shark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. In this week's episode, we sit down with Michael Eisenberg, one of Israel's leading venture capitalists and an author of numerous svarim about Torah values and economics. As you will hear in the episode, Michael is also involved in nonprofits, in professional networking for Olim, and much, much more. Michael is sharp, passionate, and pulls no punches, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Before we jump in, a quick reminder to join our quiet WhatsApp group where we have exclusive bonus content, invites to in-person events, and more. So if you don't want to miss out, click on the link in the show notes. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. Michael Eisenberg, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Yaakov. I love the name of the podcast.
So you had a very long and interesting career in venture capital, in Torah, in nonprofit work, and a lot of it really started with an interaction you had with your Rosh Yeshiva of Amital when you were in Har Etzion. So maybe we can start by sharing that story, and then we'll jump into a conversation.
Sure. It's ironic we're talking about this during a current war because it happened after the Gulf War of 1991. So for those who don't remember, Iraq launched Scud missiles against Israel in 1991 when the U.S. invaded Iraq. Attacked the ally, not the perpetrator, so to speak. We spent a lot of time in sealed rooms that time, and about a week after the war ended obviously on Purim Day for those who remember. But a week after the war, I found myself in a room with 10 or 15 other guys with Rav Amital, and I asked them the following question: is there a bigger mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling the land of Israel, for somebody who moves to Israel and settles in an unpopulated place, whatever, the Negev and the Galil, or somebody who moves to Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, a populated area, is the same mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz, of settling the land? And he looked at me and said, everything is nonsense. Your question is nonsense. What you need to do is move to Israel and set up a factory that'll employ 10,000 people so that they can earn an honest and decent living. That would be the biggest mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling the land. And I hadn't planned to make Aliyah until then, but on the spot I said, I'm going to make Aliyah and see if I can do that. And it really, that moment changed the trajectory of my life and my life pursuit, which was, then to try to see if we could employ 10,000 people to earn honest and decent living. It turns out that in the 21st century, or the end of the 20th century, factories aren't as good an idea as high tech. So I ended up in high tech. But nonetheless, that remains my inspiration to this day, that same interaction with Rav Amital, Zichrono Livracha.
So there are a whole bunch of things I want to unpack from this story, and I want to start with Aliyah. This podcast is going to come out close to Yom HaAtzmaut, and when I speak to Americans, I oftentimes hear about the professional aspect of Aliyah as a barrier, an obstacle, something they're scared of or worried about. But this story flips that on its head and says that the professional journey is part and parcel of the Aliyah journey. So could you talk about what a good, healthy mindset for someone from America or someone who was already here as an Oleh to think about their career trajectory in Israel?
I think there's two parts there, so maybe three. My wife would tell you, which is true, that we made Aliyah so our kids or grandkids wouldn't have to. That was true in 1993 when we moved here. I think it's a lot more true today, given everything going on. It doesn't matter if you're from Teaneck or Philadelphia or Los Angeles or wherever, London, obviously. And then there's, the professional aspect. And I think particularly Orthodox Judaism in America has gotten to the place where lifestyle is so expensive that people can't imagine that I'm not going to go do this, very, remunerative profession because I got to pay for yeshiva day school. Life in Israel is not as expensive. It's not cheap, but it's not as expensive. And you can give your kids a yeshiva education here without having to mortgage 5 houses. And there's less keeping up with the Joneses in Israel. So I think that the standard is different. But I think the other thing is this is a land of opportunity. We have a growing population. It isn't a land of 400 million people, but it is a land of 8 to 10 million people in an area of the world that's certainly undergoing change and is interesting. It has a lot of opportunity looking east and looking west. And I think you have to be thoughtful and entrepreneurial about it. I think in general, most people fear change. from people, even though they say Mechadesh b'tuvo b'chayom tamid ma'aseh v'reishis, meaning that God renews everything every day. Most people actually don't believe that. They say it, but actually they believe that tomorrow will look like today. And I get up in the morning and I'm not scared because tomorrow looks like today. And at the end of the day, tomorrow is different. And the difference is what you create it to be also. And I think we've kind of lost that pathos. And then the last part I would say is, what's important in life. And I think there's become this obsession with, Parnassa and this, that, the other. And by the way, that's not to minimize. I set up an organization called Nevo, which is a professional network for Olim and high tech here, because it's hard when you're an immigrant. It was hard for me when I came. You didn't have a network. You didn't know anyone. I know to call. I turned up oftentimes at the early high tech things in the mid 90s. I was the only yarmulke there. And it was hard. And it's hard, by the way, when you're an immigrant to any country, it's hard. And I think people remember, some people, my grandparents are American, but for the most part, but many people had grandparents who came or great grandparents who came and they had an accent to the day they died, and didn't speak proper English when they were in America. And you're an immigrant, you didn't know the system. Wherever you grow up, the system. I still walk around Manhattan, it feels like home. Like I know Manhattan like the back of my hand. I know the system. I'm living here 30 years, and I still don't understand the system. By the way, I can't read my bank statement, and my Hebrew's fluent. I've written Sfarim in Hebrew. And it's just, that part of it's hard. And the same thing is true professionally. It's a challenge, but it's important. And it's important, and I think it's not only important, I think it's possible, and it's more possible today than it was 30 years ago. And so I encourage people to do it. I think this is where our future is. And people ask me why I'm in high tech and why I'm in Israel. Because I want to live in the future. I want to be where the future of the Jewish people is. I want to be where the future of the economy is. And that's high tech, and that's, Israel. And I encourage people to do it. You can do it,
Yeah, I highly recommend everyone to follow some of your writings and podcasts about Aliyah and the society. I think it's super important. And I think just the professional aspect is something that people have this fear of. But as you said, once they understand that it's a totally different ballgame, there's so many opportunities. And when the Chassam Sofer writes that anytime you're working to develop the economy in Israel, you're Mekayim Mitzvah Yishuv Haaretz, as Rav Amital said. So it's completely different than the way people may perceive it to be.
30-something years ago, I was with Rav Lichtenstein in the room, and I can't remember exactly what the question that was asked. And the way I remember it might insult some people, so I won't say it. But the way he answered it says in America, if you work for General Electric, so you work for General Electric. In Israel, if you work for Tadiran, so you work for Klal Yisrael. I think that's very, very, very true. It's a paraphrase of the famous Chassam Sofer. It's 100% true. And these are values decisions as much as they're economic decisions. And painfully, I'll say that I think the many Rabbeim in America have lost sight of that. I say that with great pain.
Right. I want to broaden the lens a little bit beyond Aliyah, but work in general is something that you've written about a lot, developing ideas that are relevant to the modern economy with Torah concepts. So can you teach us some Torah about how we should think about our work and our careers in the sense of Torah values and our religious framework?
Number one, work itself, right? L'avdal shamra is a tzivui to Adam Arishon. Often quote Rav Aaron. I once heard him say that people forget that Sheshes Yamim Tavod is a tzivui. Read the language. Sheshes Yamim Tavod, it's a tzivui. But Yom HaShvi Tishbo, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And I think that's definitely true. But anyone who reads the Torah understands, I think, that as much as it's quote unquote a religious blueprint, it's actually a blueprint for real life. I mean, the Avos, right? Avram Kaved Meod Bamikneh Bakesef Bazahav. Avram, I often say this, the Leitvort in the story of Avram, the leading word in the story of Avram is Rechush. And not just that, in Bris Ben Absar, why is that valuable? And if you read through, second half of Vayikra, all of Sefer Dvarim, parts of Bereshis, etc., the laws, the halachas, have to do with daily life. Schar Sachir. This morning I was learning the sugya of Hanek Tanek, of Hanukah, to an Eved Ivri Meshuchar. There's a funny that someone who's Nimkar they based and he gets Hanukah, but someone who's Nimkar they Atzmo doesn't get it, according to Chacham. Rabbi Elazar argues, what does that apply to today, or how does that apply to today? And I think these principles are all applicable. You go to yeshivas, you learn Nashim and Nazik, and then no one wants to explain, okay, what does Machlif Parah B'Chamor have to do with today? How does Perak Hazov tying to inflation. I learned with my father every Sunday morning. We just finished Ezu Neshech. When I learned Ezu Neshech, it's the third time I've learned Ezu Neshech. Actually, it's the fourth if you include Daf Yomi. It's the third time I've learned Ezu Neshech outside of Daf Yomi. And the older I get and the more time I spend in business, I understand Ezu Neshech entirely differently. I understand the concepts of what Chazal we're dealing with and the Amoraim we're dealing with differently. But we need to ask the modern questions. I don't care about Saw B'Saw in ancient times. I care about it because it's Torah, but I don't care about it. I want to understand what Saw B'Saw means in modern economy. I want to understand how commercial credit differs from consumer credit based on the Gemara Ezu Neshech. I want to understand, is a forward contract today structured any differently? I want to understand, as I've written in one of my swarm, is a heter iska worth the paper it's written on today? By the way, the people who write heter iskas in order to lend to their fellow man, like if I lend you $1,000 and I write a heter iska, does that really absolve me? I don't think so, for what it's worth. That's a controversial position. I think I can stand behind it. But I'm interested in how it applies to a modern society. By the way, not just a modern society. Is our society in Israel different from the society in Teaneck or Los Angeles or London or Barcelona of the 1400s in the way we need to think about these problems? Pasuk in Parshas Rabim, right? That what does that mean about our relationship? We never had this in 2,000 years. Like, what does that relationship mean that we should loan money to nations of the world? And how do we think about that in the context of the Shulchan Aruch? About the Isra, the mitzvah, this case maybe of lending to a goy with ribbis. These are questions that require modern applications and interpretations if we are to take Torah seriously. I take Torah very, very seriously. I don't think it's a yeshivish pursuit. I think it's oftentimes locked in the base medrash. It's been jailed, I would argue, in the base medrash. And we need to apply it to real life. It's a blueprint for real society. And we have an opportunity to build that society. But we need to apply it and not necessarily use the concepts or the applications of the past. As our economy's changed, technology has changed, a lot of things have changed. And halacha changes. The halacha stays the same. It's the application that changes.
Right. And one of the things that people struggle with, and I once heard a very chashuv Talmud Chacham criticize Rav Amital for this point. He said, if you take the position that work is a mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah, as Rav Amital said, to make sure you're hearing the baby cry and working your hardest to solve the world's problems, what could end up happening very quickly is that you completely lose sight of Ruchnius and Torah and the spiritual side of Judaism. So how do you think about that framework in your own life? On the one hand, you are all in on building up this country, building up the economy, solving some of the world's thorniest problems with technology, along with keeping yourself grounded in spiritual values.
I'll be honest, I don't understand the criticism. I feel like that's a Gerald Ford criticism. We couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't get it. And there's a mitzvah l'kadosh Shem Shemayim. Really, if you sit in the base medrash all day and all you see people of the same ilk, I don't see how you're mekadosh Shem Shemayim at all. Kiddush Shem Shemayim, by its definition, is what other people on the outside looking in think about you and think about what the values represent. And that only happens when the rubber hits the road. And the rubber doesn't hit the road in the base medrash. You can build yourself up in a base medrash, but if you never go out and take it for a test drive, like, what does it mean? And I think the other thing is, and I'm sure the Chashav Arav, as you described him, would disagree with this point. We are people of spirit. I will argue that our religion does not seek spiritual ecstasy in any way. We are an applied religion. Halacha is a way of life. I don't think it's about the Olam Hasel Yonim, so to speak. There's a world to come for that. It is to be applied in the Torah, is to be applied in this world. And I think Rav Amital would argue with the Chashav, you don't need me, that a lot of the, what you call ruchnius, or what I would call religious ecstasy, is escapism, and doesn't leave lasting impressions. And I'm pretty certain Rav Amital would say that. I spent many, many, many hours with him, and I tend to agree. I'd also add, and this is a big difference between, I think, the way Judaism or halacha is practiced in Chutz La'aretz versus in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very personal religion in Chutz La'aretz. It's deeply personal. In Eretz Yisrael, it's more Klal Yisrael, and you see this, I'm sure, in your friends and what they're willing to do and the trade-offs they make, because halacha is a set of trade-offs. Also, at the end of the day, there's always a conflict. And the trade-offs between klal and prat are real. I have friends in America who ask me about my kids. Like the first thing they're asking me is like, I got these kids in Gaza. Is how are they keeping Shabbos? They're keeping Shabbos by defending Klal Yisrael. That's how they're keeping Shabbos. Okay, there. That's how they're keeping Shabbos. Or they make Kiddush. So one of my kids was in Gaza for Purim. He got a note to me beforehand, like a week and a half before. Could I please record for him the Megillah? Because he's not sure he remembers how to lane it, but he thinks a Megillah in his tank. And he'd like to read it with the trup and not just read it himself. So I saw him this week, and I asked what happened in the end. He said, "You wouldn't believe it. We're in a house in Khan Yunis, and we had 11 or 12 guys, and we couldn't get a light on. We had a Megillah. So somebody read the Megillah by the flashlight of his smartphone there. We read it quickly, etc. And the next day I listened to you on an MP3 player or whatever it is, and I had a Megillah, paper Megillah in my tank. I don't know. It seems pretty amazing to me. I think, you can hear with a minion. In Teaneck, you can hear it with a minion. In Khan Yunis, you'll do it in your tank. And I think you're kind of a bigger mitzvah. We had this conversation in which he said, but when everyone was banging, their tables for Haman, I was actually engaged in the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. You don't have that in New York.
Wow. And I'm just curious for you, you gave the muscle of a car, the rubber hits the road, you got to actually get out there and do the drive. But for you, how do you think about your spiritual gas tank, keeping those values replenished and strong, the maintenance that a car requires? How do you just manage to keep those values set and thriving, even though you're so busy doing so many other things?
The second person asked me that question today. I don't think it's such a big deal to be candid. Learn every day. You got to learn. One of the things I learned from my father is that if you're not kovei itim, it runs away. And I think you need to be kovei itim. That's my mornings. I'm an early riser in general. Right now, I write for the most part. Like I said, I was working in the sugya of Hanukkah. I'm in the middle of writing for my Sefer on Dvarim about Re'eh, the economic theory of Parshas Re'eh. And you have to learn. You have to learn Torah. You have to learn Torah. There's just no substitute for learning Torah. And then I give just now from giving a lecture, a shiur, a class, I don't know, at Machon Lev High School. And I think people think they're answers to every question. As a guy who works in technology and in the future and lives in Torah, I think there are a lot more good questions than there are good answers in general. And so I live well with lots of questions. It's one of the things I taught myself in yeshiva, probably even before. Rav Amital used to speak about this a lot, but not only. I believe I learned this from Rabbi Michael Hecht, also Hashem should send him refuah shlema, that there are a lot more questions than answers. I love the metaphors. I suppose the class I gave was on a Moshe Nigash el Rafel asher shama Elohim. I love the metaphor of Moshe walking into the fog. And now we talk a lot about in our times the fog of war. We're always in some sort of fog of war. There's great uncertainty in the world. There's great uncertainty in religion. If it was called certainty, we would say there's vados. Instead, we call it emunah, faith. Faith means I have no certainty. And Moshe Nigash Rafael Shasham Elohim, Hashem exists in the uncertainty. That's where God is. And so the more uncertainty there is, well, for some people, that's me'arer, that undermines what you call the ruchnius or whatever is their emunah. For me, it strengthens it because I think that's where God is. God lives in the uncertainty. There's a medrash, I think, in which Moshe steps onto a cloud when he gets to Torah. And the cloud. You can't stand on a cloud. That's the point. You can't stand on a cloud. You get the Torah when you step out, when you can fall. When there's where there's uncertainty. Kodesh Baruch Hu exists, Hashem exists in the Arafel, Asher Shama Elohim, and there's a lot of uncertainty. There's more and more. There's economic uncertainty in the world. There's anti-Semitism. There's civic uncertainty. There's military uncertainty. There's technological uncertainty with the advent of artificial intelligence. So I think this started in 94 and 2008. It's accelerating now. For another time, we can talk about the comparison between this and the Industrial Revolution. It's like real. But Kodesh Baruch Hu, that's where he is. He's in the uncertainty, in the questions, lots of questions. Mysterium tremendum, as the Rav would often say.
Okay, so we talked about the aliyah part of the story. We spoke about the professional, personal part of the story. I want to go to the next part, which is the fact that Rav Amital encouraged you to help people earn a decent living. So this is the Rambam's famous principle that the best type of tzedakah is to help people earn a decent living. That's the greatest chesed you could do for a person. And my question is, that's a beautiful message for a VC. It's a beautiful message for an entrepreneur. It's a beautiful message for someone who's crafting government policy about growth and stuff like that. But what about someone who thinks that their tafka in life is to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant? What do you say to them about this mindset of growing the pie and making sure there's economic opportunity for everybody? Is that a relevant message, or is that something which is more for other people?
It's not just a chesed, it's an economic imperative. And I think that's important, particularly in a sovereign country, because civic cohesion relies on it, number one, and number two, economic growth relies on it. I have a piece coming out in Tradition. I think it might be this week. I wrote it so long ago, it's hard to remember. I wrote it like what feels like eons ago. It was written in, I think, in July. The world has changed a lot since July. About exactly the question that you're asking, I think we have an ethos of Hayei Bracha, of Avram Avinu, and he empowered his nephew Lot. So I don't think it's just government policymakers. It's anyone. You have a community. You're going to have a serious undermining of some professions, including some of the ones you mentioned, like accounting and law, et cetera. It's coming from artificial intelligence. We see it already in our venture capital fund. I mean, we have a company that in a certain segment of the market is replacing accountants and bookkeepers entirely using AI. But a lot of these people could be investing in entrepreneurial activities of people in their community. So if you're a doctor and you have extra income or assets, you can invest in the stock market, or you can invest in small business in your community. You can invest it in income sharing agreements with people who are learning a trade, with people who want to learn a new skill to level up, because you're going to need people with elastic skill sets and elastic wage earning capabilities in an era of AI. And so I think it's on everyone to do this, and that's why the Rambam wrote it to everyone. The Rambam wasn't writing it to a certain class of people. It's available for everyone. And not just that. I wrote this in my Sefer on Shmos, on the Parshas Yisro, about Lo Sachmod. Lo Sachmod, at least in my reading of it, is not, there's the famous Ibn Ezra and Shadal, that it's trying to govern your hearts. There's the Rambam that it's a slippery slope, right? Lo Sisavagos, Lo Sachmod. And then there is Philo talks about it as a way that, societies corrupt themselves because they always want more and more and more and more and more and more. Lo Sachmod, I think, if you look at the pasuk carefully, Sharo Abdo, Sharo Chamro Abdo B'Amaso V'Chol Asher Recha, and his wife. The shore and the chamor and the evid were the factory of old. That was the means of production. What the Torah is asserting is that if you covet and target your fellow's means of production, it's not just that you coveted something, it's you disrupted, you eviscerated his ability to earn a living because you took his means of production and you forced him to guard them. Even if you didn't take them, if I know you're coveting them, I force you to guard them. The same is true of the person's wife. It's an undermining of his potential stability. I think the interesting thing is what happens if you're not in a zero-sum means of production environment. That's very industrial. That's very agrarian. But instead you're in a digital world where coveting and sharing somebody's brain and collaborating actually increases the pie. Does coveting change from a negative to a positive? And here I think what the Torah is actually trying to tell you is don't covet and then take his means of production, but instead partner with him. How'd you get to covetous? Well, I see it's possible because he's probably struggling. So I want it. I don't want to compete with him. I want to destroy him. Or I want to take his means of production. Instead, the Torah says, hey, slow down. Go partner with the guy. Mentor him. Help him. Invest with him. Get him back on his feet. That's, I think, the inverse of lo sachmo. We never asked the question like, okay, lo sachmo, what? Yes. I think the yes is partner with the guy, help him out, shore up his capital base, and give him the mentorship. And that's kind of the lo sachmo to the brain, or the sachmo to the brain, where, I covered your input because you're my brother. That's why it says
when I was younger, I had this thought that in order to build a really genuine career that's built on Torah values, so you obviously need to be trying to help other people. That's like the language that we speak. We're an Olam Chesed Banan and Am Shel Gomlei Chasadim. And I thought that there are some for-profit companies that are doing very important work, really making the world a lot better place. But there are plenty of for-profit companies who are neutral or negative in their social impact. So I thought that really I should go to nonprofits because there might be some bad apples there too. But fundamentally, I'd be a lot more likely to spend my days making the world a better place in the nonprofit sector than the for-profit sector. What are your response to that?
I think that for-profit is the only scalable way to do things. Ultimately, nonprofit runs out of scale because you're constantly raising money for it. And because those systems, for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to get into now, tend to not be at the forefront of technology and tend to not always be able to attract the human capital that you need in order to scale them. And so I'm a big believer that for-profit is actually a business model for doing good things in the world. I wrote a piece for Fortune. It's not the only place I've written in a few places. It's called about covenantal capitalism. You can put it in your show notes if you find it. And I'm a deep believer in this notion of what I call covenantal capitalism. This is not to be confused with DEI and ESG and all these other buzzwords. It's simply the notion that by investing for the long term, even in things that are disruptive and investing in people, we can actually grow this pie and not make it a zero-sum game. And that's not triple bottom line. It's all bottom line, one bottom line, which is make money, but do it in a kind of a intentional way that the businesses you're building actually grow the pie. And the way you think about it is I can wait for my return.
And for those listeners that don't know, you're not afraid of the nonprofit world. You do run a very, very important nonprofit called Hashomer Chadash. But let's flip the question on its head. How do you start thinking about the problems that need to be attacked in a for-profit way or can be attacked in a scalable for-profit way? And what issues that people might feel passionate about are sort of limited and need to be done in a nonprofit way?
It's a really good question, and I don't have a good answer for it, to be honest. I always have a preference for for-profit. The Shomer Chadash I think what makes it special in this case is that it feels like a 1948 spirit, or maybe even a 1938 spirit, which is that people are rebuilding the country. And I think in general, it's easier to rally around a not-for-profit mission than it is a for-profit mission. So if you need to get to masses of hours of labor, that's actually for something that may not be remunerative. It's easier or better to do that in a nonprofit way. There's other areas where if you have to interact with the state, which the Shomer Chadash does, people are less choshed b'ksherim. They less doubt your motives when you're nonprofit versus for-profit, and I think that's also something that's worth considering. And then the last area is, unfortunately, we're still not at a state in society of a lot of things around the periphery of society for which there's no business model yet. I think we will get there, by the way, over time. I'm optimistic about that. And I've done a bunch of work at, let's call it the economic empowerment or social periphery of society, where I actually see the business model emerging. We're now 8 or 9 years into it, maybe a little more. But to get started, it required not-for-profit work because the return was, how you would build a business model was completely unobvious. I think we're now getting there. Something like looks like income sharing agreements, but the progress is remarkable.
And that really leads back to one of the things we started with, which was you mentioned the economic periphery, but there's also the geographic periphery, which you started this whole story with. And I'm wondering how you think about that today. The way I think about it, looking at friends of mine, is that Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv are such beautiful, bustling cities, but the prices are so expensive. And there's all this land in the Negev and in the Galil, and people they feel trapped because they feel like the tech world is all in Tel Aviv and maybe in Yerushalayim. And so I can't really move to Yerucham or to Carmiel or whatever it is. So where do you think that we stand on that issue today?
One is my daughter lives in Yerucham and her husband is studying computer science at Ben Gurion. Whether they'll stay there afterwards, I don't know. It's a problem. One man's view of the world is that we need to think about housing and transportation in the same breath. And unfortunately, this government doesn't. Not just this government, the Israeli government doesn't. I think many governments don't. And we need to be building high-speed trains that go to all these places where you have cheaper real estate. That's number one. I don't believe that high tech is going to be for everyone. But in a growing country, there's a lot of opportunity. And so you can go to Dimona or Yerucham, and there's a pile of different kinds of companies you can set up to take advantage. And I think there's going to be more manufacturing here over time, smart manufacturing. Some people call it Industry 4.0. No reason that shouldn't be built in Dimona. It already has it, or in Yerucham, or in the north. And while we're at it, I think we have the big challenge we have right now. Hopefully by the time you air this in Yom Ha'atzmaut, it'll be better. We cleared our people out of the north. Whoa! Who's going to set up a factory there now? That's a big question. I'm in the cheap seats in Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, and I recognize that, but it's got me thinking, what can we do? We got to fix that. We went from a buffer zone in Lebanon to a buffer zone in the north of Israel.
Yeah, it's sticky, but also lots of opportunities. So Bezrat Hashem, we can figure out some great solutions to develop that. But it is interesting.
It depends on us.
Yeah, so would you have any advice for someone who's young and thinking about that issue? Do you recommend that young people try to go out there and make things happen in the periphery, or you think they should just start off in the Tel Aviv area and then move out later on?
My wife likes to tell our kids that who say maybe we should move like to the Otef of Gaza, or maybe we should move to Yerucham. She says, we moved 6,000 miles. You guys can do the extra 100 kilometers. I'm not giving your generation advice on where they should live or how they should do it. I do think the one thing I can tell them is there is incredible opportunity if you just decide to do. And I think, this goes back to your question about the Chashav Arav before. We are a people of action. And yes, I know Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. I daven every day. We are a people of action, and I encourage the young people listening to you to take action. Do things. Do. Acharei ma'asim nimshachim halevavot. When Avram Avinu, Hashem says to him, I'm sitting and learning, he says, Lecha me'aretzchem v'adchem v'eis avicha el haaretz asher eka v'eschol l'goy gadol v'avarcha v'agal hashemecha v'ebracha. Right? And Avram goes, and what comes with it? V'es hanefesh asher asu b'charan. When people do, when they move, people follow them because they become leaders by the fact that they do. And I think that's very important.
I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a listener to the show, and he said that he learned in Har Etzion. He said in the Gush, they look up to Michael Eisenberg as their star alumnus. He said it's great. He's able to do all these things. He teaches Torah. He learns Torah. He's in business. And he pondered, I wonder what it was like for him when he was in his 20s and he had a young family and he had no leverage in his company and he was a junior associate or whatever he was doing. So do you want to open up a little bit about that period in your life and some of the things that you did then that set you up for where you are now?
I mean, I started my career in political consulting and I was fired. And they didn't tell me I was fired. And the way it worked then was they paid me in arrears, and I actually laid out the money for the company in Israel and got paid. And they didn't pay me for that either. So I was in debt. And we had one kid, and we, Baruch Hashem, had a bunch of kids, as you know. And life was hectic. And I was turned down from tens of jobs, for a variety of reasons. I hadn't done the army, other reasons. But we had decided we were moving to Israel and we were staying here. And, it wasn't a trivial period. My wife's family has some health issues too. It was not a trivial period to say the least. And we moved here at the beginning without family. And I think one of the things I took away from family members, parents, grandparents, Rav Amital for sure, was perseverance. Like I said, we had a lot of kids. It was, my wife and I look at each other now and say, did we ever sleep? Did we have a moment of rest? And there were trade-offs. There were days that I couldn't go to Tel Aviv because I had to pick the kids up. Yafa was pregnant with somebody and was tired, and she was getting her master's in Tanakh, and I had to pick up the kids, and so sometimes I left Tel Aviv like 3:00 in the afternoon for the first time. There was another period in time where I was working in Herzliya when I joined Benchmark. I left the house every day at 5:30 in the morning to go to Minyan in Herzliya, and I learned Daf Yomi then afterwards, and then went to the office and came home earlier because I couldn't sit in that traffic. It was a disaster. It was driving me crazy, And Yafa pitched in there. And so, like, the way I think about it is I was very fortunate to marry an incredible woman. I often say that the second best decision of my life was moving to Israel. The first one was marrying Yafa, you know her. So I think I would tell people get married. Two is I actually think having kids young teaches executive skills in addition to everything else. Executive function, as they like to call it in the OT world. You got to juggle a lot of things and make it work. And I think having a can-do attitude about that and the importance of children is important. I think my kids have taught me also to be more me'urav b'das and mabrios, because kids are all different and people you meet are all different, and that requires that and to juggle more. And really, my father, who got me a Malamed when I was in the third grade to teach me, and the people I was fortunate to learn with, Rabbi Michael Hecht, who I mentioned before, and Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, with tremendous privilege to learn the shir. Rabbi Hecht sent me there, I should say. It taught me the importance of Torah and kind of sticking with it. I don't think I've done anything unique in that way, but it wasn't always like straightforward. And one thing I'll share was I had a real temptation in 1997, I think it was. I got an offer to move back to America for a lot of money. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. We already weren't sleeping that much. And at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock one morning, I think Yafa was nursing or something like that. And I woke up, I said, we didn't come to Israel for money. We're not going to leave. And that was also an important moment for me, which was, it was really important to make it work in Israel for our kids and our grandkids and the future of Klal Yisrael. And I deeply believe in that. Deeply, deeply, deeply believe in that. I believe in the future of our people. I believe that Hashem has given us an opportunity that our grandparents weren't blessed with, our great-grandparents, that Rashi wasn't blessed with, that, my great-grandparents would have given an arm and a leg for. And it's on us. And it's on us. And it's our responsibility not to mess it up and to take responsibility. And I don't want to be, last week, I know you're going to air this later, but last week was Parshas Parah. And in the Navi, in Yechezkel, he speaks about Etzem, the being in Golus is a Chil Hashem Shamayim. That's what the Navi says. I didn't say it. The Navi says it. Ve'amor am Hashem elu me'artzo yatzo. Said, this is Hashem's people, and they left. So I've got an opportunity to fix that Chil Hashem. How can I sit on the side? That's what I think. Navi Yechezkel, Nahar Kvar, left in the Galuta Charash V'Amasger. Right? So people, right? Why? Because they saw God, they saw his hand in history. Saw his hand in history. They saw more. We've seen more than Yechezkel ben Buzi, the Navi. How can you remain apathetic to that? It's chus. I have goosebumps.
It's a very, very special time that we're in. And I'm wondering if you had any other parting thoughts, because you've done all this work and it's super important. We'll put all the links as much as we can in the show notes to really just applying the Torah values with a language that is relevant and applicable to the reality that we're in right now today. What would you recommend other people do, someone who's listening to this, and they also want to be involved in building that bridge between the Torah, which is eternal and godly, with the reality which is changing so fast every single day? What's the first step they should be doing to start being involved in that bridge building process?
It's not a bridge. I think this is a mistake. Excuse me for catching you on the language. It is not a bridge. A bridge implies that there are two sides to the river, and I need to build connective tissue. I think that is the approach of many chashav rabbanim, as you call them. I think it is false. This is intertwined. This is a fabric. And Torah is the DNA of the fabric of society. And it morphs and changes over time as reality changes. But it's capable because it's made it 3,000 years. There's what's it called? There's it's a law. It's called, I'm blanking on it. About a deli that's been around for so long, it'll be around a lot longer. The Torah's been around for 3,000 years. And more than 3,000 years. But it's going to make it. It's going to be okay. And you need to have a belief, which I do, that it doesn't need a bridge. It has what to say on every topic. It may morph, it may change, it may be applied differently, but it has what to say. And I don't need to build any bridge. It's organic. It's organic. It's the superstructure or the substructure, depending on how you look at it, of the decisions we make in life, of the things we decide to build and do. It's a set of values. And this notion that we have to hide it away in the klois or in the base medrash and be misbada is, I don't get it. I think it's damaged Torah. I think, I'll say something radical, I think that the hisbadlus, the separation to a different island, which is similar for those who read the book The Benedict Option about Christianity in America, the hisbadlus in many parts of our Jewish people has caused that in those circles, there hasn't been one serious machshava book that's come out in decades, since the Chazon Ish Emunah B'Tachon. It's not an accident. Torah needs to be in real life. It's real life. It's mamish real life.
I may not push back and just respond a little bit. That it seems to me, even as someone who grew up in the Tilumi modern Orthodox institutions, that there's still that prevalent thinking that the Torah is narrow and constrained and constricted. So again, what should we be doing besides just shifting that switch in your mind to actually making sure that it's broader and have that broad application?
Live it, apply it. Don't be afraid. Live it, apply it, and don't be afraid. It's narrow because we make it narrow. Torah is really rechava minayam, not like in some theoretical way, but because it literally touches all aspects of life, right? From business life to sexual life to national life. We have a view on what government should be. One of my life projects, as I like to describe it, is I want to know what does I prefer to call an Israeli economy than a Jewish economy look like? Like, we're not America. We have a capitalist economy, but why do we call it capitalist? What's the Jewish view of what an economy is? What does a Jewish democracy or governance look like? Is it more tribal? Is it more centralized? Is it more federalized? Like, what is it? The Torah has what to say about this. What does the Torah have to say about the humanity of artificial intelligence? I think it does. What does it have to say about credit systems? I think it does. And not just in an analysis, I go to a based in because whatever, because I don't like that the bank charged me interest. No, I would build it right. As a modern credit system work that way. And I think we have what to say, and we have a once in a multi-millennium opportunity to actually put that together. And I don't think we need to be afraid of, there's like this dichotomous trope. Either it's the laws of the secular state or halachic state. I think those are both extremes. I think we have a culture and a belief system of 3,500, 4,000 years. And we shouldn't pull it backwards to there. Instead, we should pull it forward to now and say, we can create a uniquely Israeli economy that has a chance to be a Kiddush Hashem. We have a chance to create a uniquely Israeli jail system, policing system, right? Where recidivism, right? Recidivism is where somebody goes back to jail because he learns more criminal activity in jail. Is not a function. Why do we have Ari Miklat? No one asked this question. We have Ari Miklat for rehabilitation. Go look. It's very clear. I wrote this in my last sefer. It's very clear. Ari Miklat are rehabilitative and not jailing. That's what it is. What does a rehabilitative Jewish criminal justice system look like? That looks more similar to a near Miklat than it does to the Atlanta Fulton County Jail. That's what I'm interested in. I think we have a lot to say. A lot.
In order to do that, we need to be thinking in a certain way and then acting and building in a certain way. And
First
it seems to me
learn. First, we need to learn.
Right.
You need to learn. And then you need to be certain that it has what to say. And then you need to act a certain way. And it needs to be more of b'dasim abrios. Because again, if you're in the clothes, nobody knows. Nobody cares.
important. I think that when I speak to a lot of people kind of yeshiva, they really don't have that language to think about their career and their work within the Torah framework. And I think that you've done a great job of starting the conversation.
The other thing to think about is we live in a technological era now where people have the tools of creation right in front of them. I mean, you're recording this podcast. You would have needed a recording 10 years ago. You would need a recording studio, 10 grand, and a license from CNN to go do what we're doing right now. And look, people have tools of creation in their hands. They do. It's incredible what you can do. One guy, Yaakov Wolf, incredible. Your listeners coming out of yeshiva or whatever university, they have incredible tools of creation that our parents only dreamed of, that I only dreamed of. Wow, how much can you do? Wow, just don't be afraid, just do. Don't worry what anyone else says about it. The hardest pasuk I think to Mekayim in the Torah is Lo Sagur Mipnei Ish Ki HaMishpat Le'Elohimu. Yes, and I know the chinuch that it's set to Dayanim, read the Ramban, it's a little different. Anyway, it's not just about Dayanim, especially if you read the Ramban. Lo Sagur Mipnei Ish is the hardest thing. We're all afraid. We're afraid of failure. We're afraid what other people are going to say about us. Rabbanim are afraid what other Rabbanim are going to say about them. Don't be so afraid. Do, create. It'll be okay. And if you make mistakes, you own up. That's what tshuva is about. That's what saying I'm sorry is about. We've lost the capability, unfortunately, to say I'm sorry. I got it wrong. I messed up. But it starts with Lo Sagur Mipnei Ish Ki HaMishpat Le'Elohimu. And I think that's important. So, just step out of your comfort zone. It'll be okay.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for all of the Torah that you have taught in the past. We'll teach in the future, and especially in these last 50 minutes. A lot of very, very important insights that I'm sure our listeners are going to enjoy.
Yeah, thank you, Yaakov.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Stark Tank. If you enjoyed this week's episode or any of our episodes, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. A quick reminder that on Thursdays we will be having episodes about Stark Tank topics in Pirkei Avos, and on Mondays we will be continuing our interview series. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.